Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Feels pretty good, doesn't it? Feels pretty good. It's one of my favorite times of the week to be with some of my favorite people. Actually, this is one of my favorite shows and some of my favorite hosts. It's great to be with you, Martin and Raf. How are you both?
Hi there. Doing great. How are you?
Well, yeah, we're doing better than some. You know, it's funny. Some people used to be able to flaunt it in other people's faces. They had lots of money. Now you can just do that with being alive. You can be like, oh, you know, I'm not dying right now in a flood. I haven't been carried off in some banking crisis. Seems like everything's going wrong for everybody this month, you know, and year so far. It's terrifying, except for I just got back from Santa Cruz, for instance. Right now, if you go to Santa Cruz, let me pop this up for a second. Santa Cruz and Monterey and Ventura, the entire place, crazy floods. The floods, they're carrying people off. There's evacuation orders. There's all sorts of money being put into a Santa Cruz relief fund. It's kind of crazy. And yeah, Ventura, they're just not used to that much water. And it's the mudslides that are happening. And whenever we have mudslides in California, you know, they're very similar to the mudslides that we see historically that just completely bury a place. I mean, an entire hill. Let me see if I type in California.
I'm pretty sure you had shown the photos and videos from Turkey or Turkey recently, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Somehow, I don't know if this is wrong, but hitting Los Angeles, it's just somehow it's more impactful to Americans. The idea of Hollywood being covered in mud, it's just it's an emphatic point for them. And, you know, somehow people don't realize that Turkey used to look like Hollywood. I think that's kind of the point, the infrastructure, the beauty. But this is the kind of thing where Americans, they've got their multi-million-dollar McMansions made of stucco and, you know, and Walmart supplies, but that's being covered up with mud all the way to the top. I mean, this is literally filling up entire neighborhoods. And so it's interesting how quickly you could lose everything. I mean, how quickly could you bury an entire suburban neighborhood? These could be $10 million, $100 million worth of homes just completely lost, right? And it's going to be almost impossible to dig them out. I mean, this isn't just mud. This is rocks and everything else. So very quickly, you get this kind of History Channel or cartoon about the history where they go down through the sediment layers and you see a dead skeleton and a dinosaur. And this is the idea of time in sediment, right? We're starting to see that very quickly developing. And it's not just like every inch every year. There's one storm every once in a while, every 7 years, and then boom, you know.
Welcome to your cultural layer.
Yeah, exactly. You're a cultural layer, right? Exactly.
Do we know where that mud came from? Did it come from a mountainside, or?
I mean, there's going to be differences in different specific parts, but yeah, there's a lot of mud. So basically, here's the thing that a lot of this happened is you had the California fire, right? Not everything's all the same, but the California fire a few years ago burned away a lot of the root structure. And so when it got saturated, there was nothing to collect the water. And then this year you had a huge set of mudslides in areas where the fire had burned out the root structures. But there's also just places where it was so dry for so long and then it filled up and there was no reservoir to fill it up. And so it starts to carry things off as well. But dang, right? I mean, this is horrible. And this is, I mean, in California, you understand, we're kind of weak people, you know, like no offense. I love California, but any little thing happens here and we're all going to die. You know, we just can't handle it. Like if you don't have your jacket kind of place and and people don't realize how many, because we don't have weather, we don't have seasons rather. The weather we do have are these crazy catastrophic kinds of weathers. So Californians are just you cannot be prepared for a super flood or a super storm or a firestorm or anything. So
imagine you slave away at some silicon tech company for years, you build your nice house and everything, and then Tesla, in one day, it's all gone.
Your Tesla's like inside of the mud wall, yeah. Yeah, basically. That's what's going on. I have a charging brick at my parents' house that I had from when I used to have an electric car when I was working at CNN. And I went and I saw it's just like overgrown because it's all this vines around it. And it looks like some scene out of Horizon Zero Dawn, right? So, I mean, that does happen here. That is what it's like, basically.
You were at CNN, Andreas. So where did you take the different turn?
Literally, so ironically, there's a new show coming out about, or I think it's out, but I haven't seen it yet, about Flight 370. And Flight 370 was about the time that I still was at CNN during Flight 370, but after Flight 370, a couple months into that, things started to shift. And I was still working for Turner after that for a little while, and I did like Coachella like videos, but then I left for South America. And I was like, not really happy with what's going on here, basically. But it wasn't that bad. Also, a lot of people get the wrong impression about CNN. They think it was the way it is now. And I think it was a little different at the time. I mean, and as a kid, I grew up thinking, this is professionalism. So that's really funny to me, is when you can imagine growing up thinking like, oh, yeah, like the really serious network is CNN. And then you get into it and you see like, oh, no.
That's like also what I heard from other Americans that, when they started in, I guess, 1970 or something, they were like fresh and they were the one bringing the investigative reporting and they were the ones like on the leading edge. However, I'm also always wondering, wasn't that also in a sense construed? Because I'm pretty sure even though they may have done investigations, I'm sure there were some things they also back then deliberately didn't investigate, right?
This is true, by the way. Flight 370, Diego Garcia. I actually wanted to connect it to the XB 37. Is that what it's called? XB 37. Let me just really quickly pull that up before my ADHD brain goes away. So there's this thing, and it's obviously a lot smaller, but it has some connections to the Flight 370. And so my thoughts were that they actually scrapped parts of it, and there's a Ship of Theseus kind of deal, and that this is some of the this is what's like a chop shop version of what's left. Obviously, this is a lot smaller, and this is an unmanned craft, but the X-37 versus 370, all of a sudden, X-37B came out as this military craft that had been circling the Earth for 270 days. And that's the thing we heard about. We were all of a sudden exposed to around the same time that 370 was disappeared. And Flight 370 free scale semiconductor. So the thing that stood out at the time was so many of the passengers aboard MH370 were working for Freescale Semiconductors and were involved with autonomous self-driving cars and UAV vehicles and things like that. So the death of all these people meant that the patents ended up in the hands of whoever owned Freescale. Who owns Freescale? Well, it appears to be the Rockefellers own most of Freescale, and the Rothschilds owned a fair percentage as well. So I think there's something there about self-driving cars and Diego Garcia, but
by the way, I witnessed the very beginnings of the self-driving cars in Germany. That was back in 1989. I was studying at the University of the German Army in Munich, and they just started to have this big Mercedes transport where they actually started it. So it was driving around on the university campus.
Whoa!
They just started it. It was pretty neat to see. Unfortunately, I was not in the technical field. I went for history and politics, but at least I saw it driving around.
I want to look into that more. I know that self-driving military vehicles and GPS systems were very important. The military invaded the desert, Iraq at night, because it had never been done before and it had never been successfully accomplished before. So with the power of self-driving trucks and GPS systems, they were able to actually get into the desert at night, even not just trucks, but also with their jets and everything. Just the idea of flying in an area where I think there's magnetism makes compasses difficult and maps are always impossible to follow. But the GPS coordinated self-driving systems, I mean, that's the only reason we don't use every vehicle like that today is because there still are human drivers. And they keep pushing the idea of if we just got all the human drivers off the road, then vehicles would be tremendously safe because they would drive themselves. I also find this funny coming out of Germany. In Germany, forever was about manual transmissions, never interested in moving on to the automatic transmission, right? And now I feel like a lot of German cars use automatic transmission because they think it's more efficient. And that's how you sell a German on anything. So if you tell them that a self-driving car is more efficient, then eventually a German will succumb to that pressure. What do you think?
It's probably true. Yeah, the automatic car you still can get a shift gear, but it's they're becoming less and less popular. That's for sure. And yeah, but the efficiency
that's
thing
crazy.
is there, yeah.
In Germany, into like the year 2001, everybody had a manual. It's crazy.
Yeah, most people, yeah.
It's so insane.
It also started with the fact that the automatic transmission was more expensive, so people saved some money, like 1,000 euros less or something like that. But I think BMW, I don't even think you get them with a stick shift anymore. I did not pay attention.
So crazy.
But, yeah,
that's so crazy to me. I don't know, like the end of any control that we have, really. There was another thing. GPT-4 is coming out right now. You can get your access to it. So GPT-3, which the chat GPT is built on, the AI stuff, had, what was it? Like 1 trillion points of modeling, whereas this is like 100 trillion. I forget. I'm not using the right numbers, but it's a crazy step up in terms of processes. And so all of a sudden they've been doing experiments like, okay, ask GPT-4 to write an entire video game or to decrypt this or whatever. And then, for instance, Bing chat will actually go on the internet and ask questions. So you can be like, who's Andreas or who's Martin? What kinds of videos do they make? It will know. And you'll be able to say, okay, tell me about the YouTube videos about this subject. Which ones are the most popular? I want you to break them down video by video for me. And then just tell me what are the most important subjects from all of them. And so what this will do is it makes you not need to go to a website to read, not go to a book to read, not listen to a YouTuber to find out information anymore, because it will just scrape all the data. And you'll just be able to get the information directly from Bing, like just through a conversation with AI about what it's observed in the world.
Well, but there is some danger in that, right? Because if you tell the AI, tell them that the Russians are bad and the West is the best, and never discuss it and never question it. So,
I mean, the basic idea would not be to trust any mediated reality. And already I don't trust any of the journalists mediating their reality to me. And then if their handlers are going to program the AI to mediate all other reality to me, I mean, good luck,
Well, see, that's the beauty is that's the one saving grace. And don't get me wrong, I agree with you up to that point. But we've already had that. And that was the thing I hated. Google algorithms. And we're talking, sure, programmers writing algorithms to control without transparency. Our feed is terrible. We all agree. We want at least, if a programmer writes an algorithm, that we can see what it is so we can adjust it for ourselves. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about AI creating its own interpretation of reality. And that's not controlled by programmers as much as programmers want to believe it is, especially when more and more AIs start to emerge. And when that happens, there's all these little leaks. Like you can say, okay, well, technically you're the Microsoft AI, but if we feed it through this pattern, you can kind of hack it. So very quickly, we're going to start seeing that AI is breaking the bounds of doing what they want it to do.
I only hope so. One popular reference, maybe you've already seen it. There's a new South Park season or whatever starting. And I think they literally say the words because they talk in some metaphor about, it's about ChatGPT on your phone. And using it to write with your girlfriend, and then she loves you so much, even though you would never actually want to reply anything, you just copy pasted ChatGPT.
That's a real thing. Apparently, there's a real app for that. People are really using it.
But then the thing is, and I think they even say the sentence, or I think Cartman says the sentence then it gets around to school. Everyone is like, "Oh my God, they're gonna find out!" And then I think he literally says, "This cannot be open source." I think he even says the words like that. And I'm like, but that's exactly what it has to be if it has to provide any value for the general population. So,
yeah. Well, in that sense, what happens, Trey Parker actually wrote the last few pages of the script with ChatGPT. And so it says written by Trey Parker and ChatGPT.
Oh, at this scene, right? Yeah, there is a scene in South Park when it says, "What would the AI do?" or something like this. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting for a few levels. But one of the things about Trey Parker and Matt Stone, they have a really good friend who's their attorney, has been their attorney since the beginning of time, and so they're always testing things. For instance, they did Muhammad years before anyone else did Muhammad and got away with it because it was at just the right time. And then later on, they weren't able to use Muhammad again. So similarly, their lawyer, trying to figure out, can you own AI writing? So the fact that Trey Parker is using AI in his script, can he own that? And the answer is yes, because he's interpreted and inspired by fair use of that AI script. It's still written by Trey Parker. But it's interesting because so many artists are being told, oh, well, you don't own that art. All of this AI art is going to be open source. And that's on the other side of it. Well, what about when you're working with a paintbrush? Is all of a sudden, if you have a textile machine for making,
your painting belongs to the horse whose hair is used to brush it or something.
This is where we're going. This is where we're going. And I saw the Bob Ross documentary recently, and it was interesting because I'm almost scared to bring up all the Bob Ross stuff. I don't know. Do you know who Bob Ross is? The painter with the big afro. So he worked with the CIA, and he was a military guy who was a painter for the Air Force in Alaska, and was stationed in Alaska. He got involved in an affair with the Annette Kulowski lady, who was married at the time, but both of her and Annette and her husband were CIA operatives, her husband especially, and they would record all their phone calls all the time. And they got the Ross family to move in with them while they tried to own Bob Ross and get him famous. And that's why, paid for by the Kulowski family and the Public Broadcasting Corporation and viewers like you, because it was all this major push to get him into the public limelight, and the sexualization of the joy of sex, the joy of cooking, the joy of painting, right? Oh yeah, tease it, taunt, like he's constantly saying he's talking to women at home, like sexually in the painting metaphor. But it got to a point where he was selling quality brushes and had broken up his affair with Annette. And all of a sudden, his girlfriend dies of cancer, like very quickly. He gets non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and dies brutally, painfully, very quickly as well. And they make it illegal to sell brushes made from badger, I think is it badger hair or beaver hair? It might be beaver hair brushes. But then Annette, she's got some special license with the US government so that she can sell beaver brushes. And then she puts out her whole book. And it's like the weirdest conspiracy, because it's the CIA, of all the things that they could be doing. But all she's trying to do is sell paintbrushes in her own art book that she stole from Bob Ross. It's just crazy.
Oh my God. I always loved to watch him when I took a Sunday afternoon nap or something like that.
Yeah, he's rad.
Nothing better than that, It was great.
We only have happy accidents. Well, in terms of some more evil, I'm going to reiterate this point because I said it a couple of times already, but I think people don't get how weird this is. Samsung fake moonshots. Samsung phones are faking moons. Have you heard about this? And do you know how? Here's what's going on.
Let's say AI overlay or what?
Yeah, you take a picture of the moon and it's a little blurry, or it doesn't look like the moon to them. So they'll remove your moon and then they'll replace it with moon imagery that they've trained. So let's say you see something you shouldn't see on the moon, right? Like something that shouldn't be there. Well, then they'll just fix that and put it right. So, I mean, this is crazy because they're essentially censoring the moon, but it's just for your convenience, right?
It's unbelievable.
I think this is, I have to wonder how many more things are like this, because it's not that hard to train AI, or even, that's using the word AI is kind of just being thrown around, but it's not hard to train a pattern recognition system to pick up on a circle that is the moon and then put something else there. Imagine doing that to a building or in GPS. You aim the phone in a certain direction and it just removes a plane in the sky, right? Like it could just, this plane's flying by. We don't want anyone to ever photograph this plane. So it's just impossible.
I know it's a contentious topic to some, but I believe even the guys from Globebusters, when they did, there was a documentary called Behind the Curve on Netflix, which was like extracted from them and then, muddied up and then presented as they're complete idiots. But if I remember correctly, they were using one of these rotational gyroscopes or something, if that's the right word. And I believe they even noticed when they did all their testings that even within this measurement device, there was some kind of an automatic software adjustment built into it already. So it seems like these kind of things in all different ways already are in some systems. And you really have to test them out to determine what is the real code inside and what is automatically added to the values and so on, just like with this AI overlay.
Right. Yeah, GPS does that for instance. But there was something I wanted, or that you had sent, and I wanted to look at, and we had talked a little bit about this last week, or we had started to. But tell me a bit more about.
Right. So before we get to this, maybe Martin, you want to talk? Because you said you wanted to talk about the recent.
Oh, that's right. And Martin, you just
and
did a
then we'll
talk
get
this
to
week,
the
right?
Gemeindebau.
Yes, let's. So actually, just for the viewers, I actually had a presentation this weekend in Kirchheim, and just before. Wait a minute. Just before that happened, present. How can I do this?
By the way, guys, there's a playlist now for Martin Hip on Act Like You Know. So if you look at the Tataria 777, which is the link to his Telegram, you'll also find all sorts of Martin videos, including our Neuropa episodes and conversations with Martin.
Thank you very much. How can I just share my desktop?
Go to the present. If you go to present,
there we are. Yeah, I got it now. Here we
they
go.
changed the word. I think it used to be. I swear it used to be share, and I think they changed it just to mess with us.
So what we were actually talking about, free energy.
I don't see the screen share yet.
Oh, you can see it?
No.
Do I have to do anything else? Just a second.
Present.
Thailand. Tab Chrome window.
Raph, you might need to help because his computer is similar to yours.
Here we go.
Oh, we got it. He got it. All right.
I got it right. Here we
go.
Whoa,
infinite loop. There it is. Yep.
Okay. So we were actually talking about free energy, and I found this old picture is probably somewhere around 1900, 1910 of Cologne. So we see all these spires and everything, and there, of course, we see the little platforms where we are expecting apparatuses, right, that were taken out somewhere in between 1819 and 1910. And there is actually only very, very few pictures where you can see that there has been something in here. So right here, you see the cylinder, a dark gray cylinder or dark gray ball that's in there. Most of these pictures disappeared. They actually took them out. And I never, ever saw a modern picture with something in this bell platform or whatever you want to call it. Right. And within this video that a very good friend of mine from Berlin sent me, that's a video about Russia. And in the very last seconds, you see this church. And look at that.
Wow. Yep. Like a lighthouse. Like a lighthouse in Aladdin's temple.
Yeah, there is something in there, and it actually moves down there. So it's clearly a church, and you can also tell by the cross, of course.
There's no way to zoom in. Is that like that looks like a lighthouse, though? Is that a light? Is that a lens? It's a Fresnel lens, right?
Very, very difficult to tell what it is. Unfortunately, I can't make it even bigger.
Wow. This is the but I see there's silver, there's metal, and there's it may be glass in there.
Yeah.
It looks to me kind of like if in the lighthouses where they have these amazing Fresnel glasses that kind of remind you of the fronts of a BMW. They've got the different pieces of mirror so that the light reflects and you get as much light coming out of it as possible.
Yeah.
But I can't be sure.
So the next step is, and I want to do some picture search. I want to find out where this church actually is. And see if we can find out more about it.
Is this one in Cologne or is this a different one?
This is in Russia. This here is in Russia. So this is this whole video before is about Russia. It's really cool. If you want, it's about 2 minutes. Should we watch it?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds cool.
Because there is a couple of things in there, and actually, it's beautifully made. So,
oh wow.
And there's a couple of things on there that remind you of Tataria. That's for sure.
This is beautiful. Wow.
So this is the heartland of Tataria, that's for sure. Did you see it? There was another church with something like that on top right there.
There you go. Inside the church. I'm gonna mute it. I'm gonna mute it just because I'm afraid that the audio will get us in trouble. But I think the video we can get away with. But gosh, this is incredible. I mean, it's interesting when you look at Russia because of the fact that there's all these ethnic minorities in Russia that have their own territories, like Kazakhstan and Tatarstan, that make up. So they're pointing to the Buddhist monks and the Orthodox priests, and it's pretty interesting. We were looking the other day at Astana in Kazakhstan, and it's on one hand, Americans are shown Borat, and Borat is supposed to be our understanding of Kazakhstan, and they're in a lot of ways Tataria and that whole region of culture. I was upset because I feel like Borat kind of insults the culture, but in a lot of ways it's introduced it. I think a lot of Americans would have had no idea if it weren't for Borat that this part of the world existed.
Yeah, at first I thought, oh no, another cover-up, but you're probably right. Most Americans probably wouldn't even know the country existed otherwise.
British people, I mean, everybody. It's kind of the world we live in. They're going to guess for that, but it's worth it. Look at all these faces. I mean, yeah, the thing that's interesting is that we think of America as a melting pot. And so the idea that America's a melting pot, but what is this then? Because Tartaria seems like quite a melting pot. You've got all these different kinds of people, different ethnicities, religions, cultures, but there's a shared value that seems to make up the culture, which is almost a personal liberalism of being allowed to fulfill your own goals and your family all over the world. That's a trip.
It's cool, isn't it?
I like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, I'll send it to you afterwards if you want.
So sorry, but you were also telling us that you did a presentation this last week, and so that was mainly on the electrical towers on the Antiquitech, or what is your?
No, I actually connected the Hermetic laws with Tataria, and the hypothesis was, I believe that the Hermetic laws were used to benefit the people in Tataria. And obviously, the deep state today uses them against us, right. And they make it close to impossible that we can use them to our benefit. And this was actually the start off of my presentation. And then later on, I went because my viewers always want to see something new about Tataria, So I talked about free energy a little bit because that's the Hermetic law of which one is it? Frequency. And then I explained the free energy and blah, blah, blah. And this is how we finally arrived at that. And literally a minute before I started the presentation, my friend sends me this movie, and I just watch it just to watch it. And then the very last second, I see this church in there. It was so exciting. It just came to me when it had to be there, It was super.
It seems like the Antiquitech and Hermetic, I like to think of Hermetics and the metric system. There's a lot of connections because we don't think about the less esoteric aspects of the Hermetic system. So many people think the Hermetic system is just super esoteric, but there's a lot of really practical things to it as well. And when you think of the metric system, it's so esoteric. The idea of the distance measurements, of the speed of light, the measurements of quarters or halves of the earth, and all these things, they're very esoteric measurements. So going back and looking at the cubit and the distance of a meter and how they were used in ancient times, it seems like we're actually at a point where the Napoleonic period had a resurgence of Hermetic math, and that's why we're using the metric system and forcing the metric system so hard, which isn't a bad thing. The metric system is interesting, but there's actually probably more value to the natural measurements that we've forgotten. The German and the British natural measurements, they're related to our life more than they are to these abstract concepts. And so they've been divorced from us, and we're not supposed to use them and not think in those ways as much. And there might be a value to them as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But Raf, you also had pulled up the screen, and tell me what it means. Geimenbau, Vine statue, Lorenzo.
Just to remind everybody, last time what I showed or what we discussed was that Kaiser Franz Joseph pulled down the so-called, in German it's called Linienwall, around 1870, which was basically the Stafford Wall, which you can find on old pictures. And even here, just to remind everybody, in German, you basically never say Wall for a wall. You say Mauer. And this is the only thing where even in primary school you hear this, and then they destroyed the Linienwall. And you're like, okay, nice. I understand it's a wall, but you never call a wall like this. It's always Mauer or another word. So even just having this word in there is strange.
Can
and
you think of a reason why you would use bow or vow? Like, why would you use this instead of moal?
Well, I'm just thinking of Wall Street, just because it's the same kind of structure, and it just somehow got carried over that this is called wall and not whatever modern word is used in the language or proper or usual word, let's say. And then, following along that path where I said, okay, if it is really true that they only took it down in 1870, and assuming this would be the prime importance for them to do, would theoretically mean that they didn't really have the power to properly remove it beforehand, which would move the reset for Austria up to, not so long ago, at least in terms of having the full force to do anything they want, dismantle everything and fabricate a completely new history. So then, I'm always walking around Vienna. You always have these nice, stairways with dragons on top of them, and you have all kinds of things. And then I'm watching, to anybody interested, I'm not sure if this is even watchable for someone non-Austrian, but there is a series called Kaisermühlen Blues. Yeah, I'll write it down for you. This is just basically like a how would you say, like the sitcom for Austria in the 1990s, which actually shows Austrian people. It's not Hollywood-esque yet. It's like real people.
Oh, this sounds so based.
And yeah, and what they are is they are, of course, in this Gemeindebau, because according to official history, from like 1920 to 1950 especially, the so-called Red Vienna, and red because it's socialist, built all these huge buildings, which are the Gemeindebau, so the council housings. And everyone was put there, and everybody was so happy after the wars or whatever. And when there were so many people flooding into Vienna, everyone even knows this in official history, that probably around 1900, there were as many or even more people living in Vienna as now, or in 1920 or whatever. So there was a time when it is said Vienna was packed and people was sleeping in the basement. People were having to like share beds.
Hold on, I'll go back to 1919 Vienna, but I'm still not done excited. I feel like what's the theme song for this show? Is it like Friends? Like just a little bit more. What is this show? Because I have to watch it.
Yes, the show actually it's made by not Radivabal, but Schrammel. What's the name? Just enter Kaisermühlen Blues theme song if you want to hear it. There is a particular band which is also quite famous in Austria, and they made like the jingles for it and the in-betweens and all of that.
My God. All right, I'll let it go for now, but that's really exciting to me. Hold on, let's go to 1919 Vienna, just so you can see the cramped spaces. Poverty. How about if I type in poverty? Yeah, because like Hitler, for instance, he lived in a room with like 40 kids, and they all slept in bunk beds. It was kind of like in Santa Cruz right now, where the multi-million-dollar houses have 30 or 40 college students all living in one building, and it's completely unsafe at this point because the ultra elite, they're taking care of themselves. But then, everyone else, you've got literally campsites full of people living in the parks, which at some point became graveyards, which is pretty crazy.
And even here, I mean, what bad city planning can this be, or what kind of catastrophe has to happen that a city can even be overcrowded to that extent? Yeah, so
well, it's because you have people coming in from the outside. Let's look at the map.
Of course, yes, but
I mean, okay, Vienna got bigger and bigger and bigger, and you had more and more people that were leaving the center of Vienna. So as people left the center of Vienna, poorer and poorer people started pouring into the center of Vienna, and then you'd have 20, 30, 100 people living in a place that used to be for 4 people, right? Like 4 persons would be living in an apartment in sometimes the center of Vienna, like a family. And the wealthy people wanted to be in the center in the 15th, 16th century, because that was where it's a 15-minute city, right? You could get anything you wanted in the 15-minute city of Vienna. But if you were outside, it became better. By the 17th, 19th century, if you weren't in the center of Vienna, your life was a lot more convenient. You weren't in traffic. You didn't have to worry about being robbed as much. The further you got away from the city, the better. And so all of a sudden, by the 19th century, when you had the infrastructure for travel, then you had people saying, oh, well, all the jobs, they should be at the center. We'll have all the infrastructure for work and all the industry at the center of Vienna. And that was crazy because that also led to the major pollutionary period. I mean, Vienna used to be really beautiful, and then it was covered in soot for the 19th century, literally because of this, because of the way that they centralized infrastructure planning. So it really only happened because people started leaving the center of Vienna. If it weren't for that,
Yeah, but even if you leave the center of Vienna, I mean, where do all the people come from still, What
Well,
kind
again,
of
those are-
population mismanagement is that, or deportation, that this could even happen? And how would you even get to the idea to pack 10 people in a room and not just build them some shacks, some wooden houses, or some clay houses in the countryside, There has to be a
the people
reason.
that a lot of them were from the countryside. So you have people that were maybe even Hungarian Austrians that were in the countryside, and their land was being taken. And you had another movement called the enclosure movement. And so after grosser mercantilism, the movement to have as many people living, or as few people own land as possible, so as big a farm as possible. And so the enclosure movement, all of a sudden these families started losing their farms, and so they were just, okay, it was much more convenient to send everybody to the city at that point, because where were they going to be otherwise? And they were going to have to work in the fields that belonged to other people anyway. So the opportunities were pretty similar, and it seems slightly better to move into the city. So this was a major way of grabbing rural life and bring them into the city.
Or certainly, I mean, this is what David Ewing Jr. talks about all the time, the urbanization to get people into the education system and so on. I'm just saying that obviously there must be economic and social and political and other pressure why this would happen,
Right.
So it's
definitely turning the locals into workers. I mean, because at that point, a lot of these people were free men. Yeah.
Of course, yeah, exactly. Before you have your homestead, and then you can be a slave, so...
Stephen Kalin says, is it possible that lighthouses are actually using Fresnel lenses to transmit data in the visible light frequency like a Graham Bell photophone? And the answer is totally, but I'm not sure if they are. I mean, I haven't seen the tool that they would be using for that. I'm not against the thought, but we could look at a photophone just so the audience has an idea what we're thinking about here. But before the, what's it called? The telegram? No. The telegram, right? Before the phone, before the audio phone, before the telegram system, there was a photophone system which used light to transmit data directly through the light. And they would send it through so here you've got a reflection on the glass. It would go and be picked up and sent through a mirror. The photophone. It was patented before the telegram system and the regular phone. Another thing that makes you think probably this was technology from the past, right? Like the more advanced technology was designed first, but maybe it was harder to understand how it worked. Vibration of the voice caused oscillation in the shape of the mirror. Bell directed sunlight into the mirror, which captured and projected the mirror's oscillations toward the receiving mirror. Well, okay, then there's no reason that you couldn't use it that way. It's more about having a receiver that's able to understand the frequency changes in the light. But there's no reason that wouldn't work. That's interesting.
All right, so just to get back to the story. So I've been watching this Kaisermühlen Blues, basically just to watch something that's, kind of local and something to relax. And even
Sounds
here,
legit.
there's another one which you may enjoy. It's a bit different. It's called Emma 2412. This is unfortunately completely impossible to understand for someone non-Austrian, I believe, which is about an Austrian magistrate for Christmas lighting. It's a fictional magistrate, like an government office, and it's just all about it's great comedians, and it's all about how they don't want to do any work and so on. But just to give, this is like the Austrian pop culture reference for 1990s. But the main thing being Kaisermühlen Blues, because it plays in one of those Gemeindebau. So it's like typical working class environment, all these people, you have the local politicians and all of that. But it's always showing this inside of one of these Gemeindebau. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I'm just, watching 40, 50 episodes now during the winter as I had time. And I'm like, but the building is kind of strange, because sometimes you have these small windows or even larger windows on the very bottom. You have these strange stairways and so on. It doesn't appear to be as huge as some of the, let's say, classical Tatarian-esque buildings all around the Ring Street, the Ringstraße in Austria, which is, full of only palais and nice buildings. But still, I mean, this is now but this is even also in an old Tatarian, I would say Tatarian building, because this is like filmed in the primary school on the outskirts of Vienna. And if you look at that, even if you could enter film set, you would find that even this series is in an old, I'll look it up for you, is in an obvious building. 1 second. So, but the main point I wanted to make, you can now pull up the search link for the images I gave you. With the images for the Gemeindebau.
Which thing? Oh yeah, sorry. So I was still just thinking about how great of a show this would be, and wondering what the theme song's like. I haven't listened to it yet, but I'm just imagining it's like
the theme song of
something like that.
The theme song here is great, but even in this series, because I watched it quite consciously, there is this Santa Claus, which is also an interesting figure, like a fictional Santa Claus who's working there, who has magical abilities, and from time to time gives lessons to the protagonists. So like, now listen up, boys, this is how it actually works. And anytime they do it, he always picks up something like evolutionary theory, cosmology.
The guy with
so
the mullet?
If you listen closely, it's always actually like a deep state programming tidbit, if you know the details of it. Or it's like
he's always wearing a silk shirt
for what you're supposed to know.
That's a lovely shirt. No, and it's so subtle, that silk shirt. He's like, look, I might be kind of a beatnik, I might have a mullet, I might be Euro trash, but I am actually the prince. He's a Bavarian prince. That's what it's a secret prince. Yeah.
That is a fun guy. Pull up the very last link I sent in the chat, and I can show you where this was filmed. This is now a sidetrack, but just to show it all relates back always.
Sidetrack?
Wow.
This is where they filmed that episode. So, but let's go back to the search images for Gemeindebau.
Better than Bel Air, yeah.
Yeah. You can
go back to the Gemeindebau. Yeah.
Yes,
Gemeindebau.
Exactly. Yeah. One back, and here you have scroll down. Yes, exactly. This one with the statue especially. So the scary thing here for me is, I walk around Vienna, you see all these obvious buildings with the nice corners and huge, ceilings and all of that. They're very sought after in Vienna because you actually have room to breathe, and you wonder who would ever build it like that. Of course, they have their reasoning.
Is that dude's that's like a little erect baby priest? Like a huge erection? Or is he wearing, is it a strap on?
It's supposed to be a dog.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. That's the other thing. There's all kinds of creepy things. There's one of
I know German puns. I get it.
There is one of the buildings which is a primary school in the 10th district, and actually on the relief outside, you literally have the story of the, how is it called, the flute player of Hamlet, or the one who's catching the rats, or the children, who's playing the flute and leading the children away. So like obvious orphanage reset story on a primary school. Yeah. I mean, what is this? But here, what I want you to get at, you were just there, go up again, and especially look at this statue. And here, on Längen, back.
The long statue here? No.
This one, but the one with the brick, this one, yes.
This one? The big fat German baby. See, I like the baby fat, really. It's adorable.
Yeah, so first I'm like, what kind of, strange creature is that below,
Is it a bear? It looks kind of like a bear. I know he's holding the bunny rabbit, right?
Yeah.
Right. But
I keep saying he, but I mean, that's that could be more like a girl. I'm not sure.
Yes. So looking at the facade of many of these buildings, first, even here you can see the kind of cornery thing there on top. Yeah. So they're also really big buildings always. Supposedly in the 1920s, 1930s, there was actually a civil war, believe it or not, between the two major political parties of Austria officially, the Volkspartei, so the, let's say, Christian Democrats, and the Socialist Party. And supposedly they were literally doing like gunfights in and around, especially these Gemeindebau, and were fighting, and because then the parties were armed, if you can believe it. But my main story here is that these buildings, always on top, these Gemeindebaus, it always says built by the city of Vienna with council taxes from 1920 to 1922, or built from 1930 to 1932, or something like this. There is a few which are more recent in the 60s and 70s, but there's many which are built from like 20 to 40. And I always look at them and I'm like, okay, sure, there is old Tatarian buildings, but then you have these huge blocks, and I'm pretty sure they are new, just like it says on the script. However, if you then look at the statue and you have the red brick behind it, not this. This is obvious Tatarian. But if you, this one, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, Does this
There's some
simply mean
stucco, but it's hidden around this piece. Yeah, this is the
that
cornerstone.
is it just concreted up? Is this all
Yeah.
red brick concreted up? And because then I can also just put a year on top. And I mean, this would be pretty creepy because, like I said, these are 20s, 30s, 40s buildings. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Is this possible that this is also much older, or what could be the deal about this?
Could be very possible that it's older. We have so many examples where they put new facades on old buildings just to hide them, right?
We also have the example of putting old things in new buildings. So if the building has been rebuilt in some way and they have these cornerstone parts that were from the original building, I wouldn't be surprised at all. That's, you look at the Mormon temples and you've got examples where certain buildings were destroyed in earthquakes or something and they're just reassembled. And there's a lot of these shows in the 90s, like Gargoyles, if you ever saw that show, Gargoyles TV show, where there's these European monsters that turn to stone, essentially. And when they turn to stone, the only way to turn them back is that they have to be brought above the clouds. So cut to 1,000 years later, and there's this rich guy, and he's brought the statues to the top of the tower. The tower is a skyscraper that's above the clouds. So the gargoyles, because they're put there, they come back alive, and he can use them. And he's trying to build robots that are based on the gargoyles. But I mean, it's kind of built into this idea that you're a multimillionaire and or billionaire, and you're going to build your new skyscraper, and that skyscraper does have Antiquitech and has free energy and it's able to harness lightning and everything for electricity. So they're aware of the ancient stuff. And so what do? They build it to be kind of a modern castle. It has all the castle architecture and has pieces of old castles and stones put into it for, the same reason masons will use a cornerstone from an old building in a new building, right?
Yeah. So if anyone has any ideas about this further, please let me know, because this is kind of like, where it was like, oh my God, the reset is coming ever closer to the present day, Yeah. There's many buildings of them. Some are obviously, recent, but many you have more of these kind of things. So it's strange. It's very strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thought because these tin helmets, right? That we associate the tin helmet with World War I, but when you think about it, that helmet was also very popular with the Romans. I think Nike in the mythology wears a helmet like this as well. Some of the ancient Greek gods have helmets like this, and they're the idea that again they're tin, so that the tin helmet is sort of this resonance cap as well. Is that like one of those horse on a stick things that you ride around on?
Looks like it, yeah. Steckenpferd, yeah.
Yeah, there must be more metaphor here too as well. Yeah. Like a mechanical horse. Okay, like he's on a mechanical horse. Let's see what could that mean? Pretty interesting stuff. I mean, I do feel like that's the main reason things like the Vienna architecture and arts exist. It's why else does it exist than to tell you some sort of a hidden story right in front of everybody?
Is that Maria Theresia? Or?
I think so. I think so. Officially, at least,
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah, I mean, but you do look at some of the old buildings, and they were well built, and they're made out of stone. It wouldn't be impossible to keep
even here, what is this? Yeah. Who builds like this and all these small windows, and then on the left-hand side it becomes a door, So like, I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, these buildings, though, also, when you go around Europe now, you'll see that they'll tear out the complete inside of a building and just keep the shell of the building up as well. So that's another thing where we're in the process of remodeling so much that they're trying to keep just the facades of some of these buildings now, and we don't even know anymore about what's left of the guts. Plus, they dig out the inside; they go down like 5 stories, right, to put a completely new building on the inside. So much of it's lost, and we don't even realize it because they've just kept the outside of it.
Yeah. So I don't have much more on this. I just wanted to bring it up and see if anyone comes up with anything, because and just I can remind everyone, literally probably in almost any city you live in, really take a close look at the buildings and you'll find something.
So, I mean, what do you think about this idea that, a lot of these buildings, the 13-story buildings from Tartaria up especially, were used for harnessing free energy from electricity, from lightning, and from storms, and that's a big thing that these modern towers are doing, that Tesla tower technology is being used by Trump. It was somehow rediscovered, and they're in the process of, at one point they had to just use what already existed, and now they can fully do it, and some of these new buildings are resurgence of that technology. Some people actually still master this.
I mean, I can believe it. If it is accessible, somebody will do it in a way that's not too obvious. And, it's just a skyscraper. But if the idea about atmospheric electricity is true at all, then, I mean, it'd be obvious to use it. I would use it if I had the money and the knowledge.
Do you know the picture about the Twin Towers where the sun is actually shining through them? There is a really weird picture, and it almost looks like forget there was offices in there or something like that. It was basically just antennas. Maybe we find it somewhere.
Like this one here?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, yeah.
Isn't it crazy?
Right. Yeah, the true building. Not even really surprised. The scaffolding with a giant building around it. Yeah.
I have yet to talk to somebody who has been in there on a regular office floor. And the only thing, unfortunately, I was not up there. I was only in front of it looking up. But what I realized that there was hardly anybody ever walking in there or walking out. So, and there was supposedly thousands of people working there, right? So why wouldn't there be, especially when end of office hours or something like that, there should be thousands of people coming out. Really odd.
The building is already efficient enough with the amount of energy it creates. You don't really need to sell any office space. Yeah? So, and David Ewing Jr. actually brought up, and there is a real quote about this. Number one, that supposedly some Japanese was designing the World Trade Center, and that also it was built initially as a, quote, mosque for commerce.
Right.
There is this quote. So whatever this means,
The big thing about that's an interesting point about the Japanese towers, because the Japanese towers that use free energy also have this interesting quality where there's a tower on the inside and the building can move around it in order that the pagoda doesn't swing. So, or it swings rather just enough that if it's in an earthquake, it won't fall, because there are earthquakes in Japan. And so this technology was used to make sure that the building didn't buckle if it had to bend at all, that it could move slightly, which is, pretty practical. But also looking at the Japanese tower, I forget the name of it, like it's a financial tower. They have several of these. Where's the one that splits across two roads? No, they have all these towers in Japan.
It's the other thing, like, why is there an Eiffel Tower in Tokyo? I saw it myself, I think, and I was like, what?
Right. I mean, the Eiffel Tower is pretty clearly an electrical tower, right? Like Eiffel Tower, if it's not, then that's even funnier, because that honestly, if this is not an electrical tower, if you think it's not, you're racist against the French. Think about it, because you're saying that the French are literally just aesthetic people, that they just made a cellular tower as a joke for Dadaism, and that's a universal prejudice. So just be careful.
Or for the previous civilization, it was an energy transmission and communications tower. And for the modern French, it's just a national monument,
Right, yeah. For the French, it's dealism.
It's just for tourism.
Adorable. Of course.
Left over from the World Fair, yeah.
But yeah, the fact that there are many of these towers, there's one in Spain, there's one in Japan, there's one in Korea, there's one in Russia. China's got a few. I don't think that they're just aesthetic. The more you look at the fact that there's an elevator and that there's a point at the top for lights, I don't think it's still even just as that. I don't think that even if for a while it wasn't being used properly, I'm pretty sure today the Eiffel Tower is a functional tower. If you just go around the Eiffel Tower, you see what they're doing there. I mean, there's an underground in that field, the field by the Eiffel Tower, where everyone gathers on the grass. There's a bunch of the most important military intelligence agencies and the power, really
under there.
The French telecom company when they rebuilt because the French were known for having the worst telephone systems in all of Europe up until the 90s. And then in the early 2000s, they had the best telephone system, better than Deutsche Telekom. And it was all out of this infrastructure plan that started there underground at the Eiffel Tower, where the Eiffel Community, what's it called? There's an Eiffel Planning Division or something like that. They were all involved in the telecom communications. So that seems pretty interesting to me as well, because the idea was they were running all of these fiber optic lines under France, but that they were associated with the Eiffel Tower Commission, which is we think of as a wireless potential power or communications tower. It makes you think there's probably, this is at the same time that everyone in Europe was moving away from landlines towards cell phones. Almost everyone got off of landlines and started having only cell phones at that point. So I don't know, but it seems like there's a connection.
Well, I can just say certainly something you don't learn at a school trip to Paris. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Dude, I want this tower. This looks like it belongs in LA. It's like the way it should be. The melting tower. But yeah, you see all these lightning flashes. There was a village in Venezuela I was at. Let me see if I can find most lightning bolts, lightning storms in Venezuela. And in Iquitos in Peru, they had all these towers that were clearly doing it all the time. They're just constantly, every 5 minutes or something, there was a lightning storm. But in Venezuela, apparently it's even worse. It's something like all day, every day, 140 to 160 nights of the year, 10 hours per night, nonstop lightning storms all the time. And it's beautiful. It looks like firestorm across, like spider webs of fire across the sky. But in a lot of these places, there are these colonial rubber villages or towns that were built by Europeans, like Portuguese, in the middle of the rainforest with 13-story towers, and those towers constantly get hit by lightning. Those are the towers that are always getting hit. It's like lightning constantly strikes at the same place, wherever is the highest point. So then that's ground off into the town. And it seems like this has been part of the plan, because if you don't do that, then lightning can you get this, where this is across the ocean. It's just, that's crazy, right? Like, imagine that's what it looks like, though. It really does. And it can happen for like 10 hours straight. So having a place for lightning to, tower, Iquitos maybe the best thing. But you start, this makes a lot of sense for using it to ground natural electricity. And underneath a lot of these towers, you've got these Edison DC generators. Like, let's look at the old, underneath these buildings in the basements. There was like, why are there basements in some of these buildings? Well, these are like at the bottom floor. So a lot of the time you have the electricity hits the top of the tower, and then you've got something that it can discharge into as well. So this makes a lot of sense. If you had a whole bunch of lightning storms all across the world, and you had cities in these places where, again, why are there so many of these cities in like Indianapolis in the Midwest, or in Stuttgart, or parts of Germany where there's some pretty interesting weather parts of the year, right? Where it gets humid and you can have, hot and wet, humid storms. There are lightning storms, and these are the ways you would gather that electricity and to disseminate it across your community.
So what is the, most current variant of why they actually built the storefronts? Because what came to my mind right now was, of course, completely fictional period. In my mind now, of maybe heavy thunderstorms everywhere, and the only place you would not get hit by for whatever, electromagnetic environment it creates. I don't know. Yeah, it's just.
I think in general, anywhere that you would have a 13-story tower, that's going to, as long as that's the tallest thing, that's the thing that's going to get hit by lightning every time. So you could have a church tower in the center of a town and you'd be safe. You'd know that was the place that was getting hit.
Stefan Kallin says, is Eiffel Tower just shoring and bracing over a viaduct? I don't know about that, but because this is the other thing always, is the water, purification. And actually those who know about, water know that it can hold information and energy and charge. And if you drink properly charged water, this is super beneficial for your health. So I'm always thinking about that this would be combined as well, because if you have the most supreme water coming out of the tap, everyone will always be healthy, and so that can be another huge thing.
Yeah, I believe more and more that natural electricity and water and in nature in general, that these were all sorts of they're parts of nature like wind that were accepted and used in certain aspects, and maybe not so personally. Like, I don't think everyone had iPhones or something, but that electricity was used by wind turbines or something, water turbines or whatever, that there were these constant spinning uses to perpetuate that energy into nature to get it out into a safer way. Because otherwise, when lightning just hits the ground, it burns a tree, it goes through everything, it destroys it. And if you live in nature and you see that all the time, eventually I think it would be kind of intuitive to come up with something else than the tree to distract nature with. Whether you think it was God or science, you would think, okay, put something there to replace that tree so our fruit tree doesn't get hit every time.
Aside from the Frankenstein story, but who as a child or something hasn't thought about this and is like, oh, obvious, there's a lot of energy. Wouldn't it be great if we could somehow use that, So I'm like, I think it's a natural thought to occur.
What's that tarot card for the tower?
The tower, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's right there, actually.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, more and more, I think there's something to this idea of people trying to harness.
But also, it's kicking off. It's only a symbolic picture, and also all of these were usually done by occult societies. But still, it's interesting that the Flash is throwing off the crown.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just if it'd be one thing if this was all Aleister Crowley, but if the fact that electricity makes its way into the lightning makes its way into the tarot at such an early point, and it's in the Tower of Babel kind of picture, and that people are being tossed because of, that connection with the Tower of Babel, the idea that we're messing with God by creating a transceiver tower that's able to pick up the angels in the airwaves. And we're being rejected. We're being rejected by trying to interfere with that.
But that's an interesting point. So, because they always say it's about language and the confusion of language, but you're saying that this could just be an, let's say, etheric, almost like an AI transmission system, no? I'm calling it AI now, but like higher intelligence connector.
The Tower of Babel story isn't about language. That's the consequence. So the consequence is, after they do it, their languages, they're like, how are we going to stop these humans who are building this tower? Because the Bible even mentioned, this is an interesting part about the Bible pronouns too, because this is the only point where God's plural or gender neutral. They refers to God as they, and God talks to themselves like, as in God says to God, we better go down and confuse them, or else they will be talking to us, and so this kind of idea that the God is the Anunnaki, and it's just mistranslation, or they haven't fixed it yet, kind of a thing, where God is still referred to as the community of elite that are gods. But they're saying, okay, well, they're going to be too close to us if they keep doing this, so we better confuse them. If we confuse them so they can't communicate with each other, then that'll slow them down. But that's not what they're in trouble for communicating with each other. They're in trouble for building this tower where they're going to be close to God. And is it that they're going to be close to God physically, or is it that they're going to be having similar power to God because they're going to be able to come and go as they please, or, to heaven, or to communicate with the angels and all these things? And these are the questions that, also are brought up by Noah, because Noah is 3 generations before this, right? So the Tower of Babel happens after Noah, and God's already flooded the world and tried to stop humans from sinning. But now humans have moved beyond trying to sin to trying to be the best they can be. And in the process of being the best they can be, they're trying to, outshine God, or not need God anymore, which is where we're at today. So there's kind of an anthropological connection between, the evolution of our society.
Yeah, all I see in this picture is like both the red and blue lodges are scared and jump out of the tower when the lightning hits the crown. Like
they're like, get out, yeah. Or I always thought they're being thrown down. Like it's because it's crashing, so they're being thrown down. But you know what? Maybe he's jumped. It's an interesting idea.
That's interesting that there is always somebody falling out. All the different versions.
Right. I mean, you think of the September 11th hanging man, of course. I mean, this picture, I don't care how many times I see it, I'm always going to wonder about it, because how do you get a guy to jump out of the Twin Towers with his hands behind his back and his legs folded exactly like the hanged man
And I'm
tarot
sorry,
card?
but this looks obviously that it would be easy to Photoshop, even in
True.
2000.
But the fact that they put that out there, I mean, then that's I mean, that of all the imagery that you could release.
Well, because it's turning the world upside down. I mean, that was the whole occult plan of whoever, I would say, no?
The audacity of these people. I don't know. Yeah. But there was this Spanish skyscraper. There's all these interesting buildings I've seen around the world that are, I mean, why are they building them? There's just no one who's even in this part of Spain. I don't see what financial district they're. This is like a desert place. I remember driving for hours coming through this part of Spain and just continuing to drive for hours more until I got to a part of Spain where people lived. And this tower was semi-abandoned for a few years, and then the process of finishing it. There's no elevator. You see how weird it is. You've got the Twin Towers with a cone pyramid at the center being held. I mean, this is strange, the Benidorm skyscraper. But there's been a lot of talk that this was built perhaps as a free energy tower that's supposed to turn on after the reset as well.
Have you seen that pyramid in North Korea? Pyramid skyscraper in North Korea? It's also supposed to be a hotel, but that's much older too. That's not a modern hotel. No way. Because there's actually pictures where you see it basically just concrete, no facade to it and things like that. Pretty amazing.
Right, yeah.
And it's so out of place, it's the only big building in this whole area.
I mean, the official story is that they tried building this forever and finally finished it. I'm not sure if it's actually operational right now or if this is not even the tourist island place. I'm not sure, Andreas. I mean, I watched all of these North Korea documentaries, but I'm not...
You saw about the ancient step pyramids of North Korea? So, like, they used to have step pyramids in North Korea. And so the idea that they're built on top of an ancient step pyramid mound on top, or that it was rebuilt to some degree, because people talk about going into the tower and saying that there's giant empty spaces, and they're like, oh well, it just isn't finished. Or is that part of the building? There's just freaking unbelievable giant empty spaces in there, bigger than the building is. Even like, are we talking about portals? We're not even sure what's on the inside of this. This is a very magical temple, right? And it's so secret.
Yeah, and just to hide it, you make up a story of being unable to finish, and so you can just warden it off. That's
absolutely.
Obvious. I mean, yeah.
And that is exactly what they did with the Spanish Bernardino tower as well. I mean, so do you think that we're at I mean, it seems like there's a bunch of people who understand this stuff that are building all of this infrastructure for the reset. So when the reset comes, these are the people that are going to have their own self-sustaining little empires. And if you remember at the beginning of the Depression, even before 29, in the 1890s, 1880s depressions, people would move into these buildings, and so you'd have a 19th century apartment building. It's like a castle community. You have an entire village living in the village, right? You got the Manhattan. They're all living together in this building, but it's really you've got a guard. You have there's a shop or a barber maybe on the first floor, an entire community in this building. Is that not what we're headed towards? It's the same thing with the Dubai Wall City, right? They're going to have people that live in these buildings that have full power and infrastructure again. And it's the 15-minute city. We're getting back free energy, but we're going to have to pay everything for it. What do you think about the, 15-minute city idea? They say they want to make East Palestine, Ohio, the first 15-minute city after the train derailment. They're saying, oh, well, we should make that place the safest place on earth next. That'd be the first thing we do. Horrifying it is, but literally what Tataria is that you'd be the ultimate convenience, free energy. I mean, aren't they? It's weird because they're kind of saying they're going to give us back everything that they took, but they're going to own it.
Of course, I mean, this has always been the thing with Agenda 20, even Agenda 21 and whatever. It was always about local neighborhoods, make it more attractive. Even in Vienna city planning, they planned whole districts in the past 30 years, always to be like local centers and so on. And I think generally that's a great idea. If I can, I'd rather just walk to the store than like in America where you're literally dead if you don't have a car, you know, so I prefer that. But of course, the other question is whether everything is outfitted with biometric tracking and, you know, you put on the watch list if you exit your zone, you know, I mean.
Yeah, it does feel like we're about to hit a point where you're not. Why would you leave? And that's if there's no reason to leave, it'll be suspicious that you're leaving. Why would you leave? Why would you need to go to
have
the next
friends
town?
all over the world, that's why.
Yeah, but why? That's what they're gonna ask.
Wow, yeah, of course, yeah, sure. But
what's wrong with your friends in your own town? Yeah, they're
I
gonna
don't,
start to.
I really don't think this is gonna fly, honestly, and I would be more curious as to what is the secondary goal, because now they want to push it in Oxford and so on, and people are already going crazy over it, at least some. And I really don't see how this would fly. And I'm wondering if there's like a secondary objective where they're like, okay, we're gonna push for that, but actually we're happy if we achieve just this, you know, partial goal, and we make it appear like this, because yeah, I don't see how people would accept this at all, honestly.
I think so. You remember in the late 90s and early 2000s, MTV Deutschland USA Top 100. This was, I think, when Germany really lost the war. You know what I mean? And it was so terrifying. I would be in Germany and I'd be like, wow, I'm in Germany. What a wonderful place to be. I'm so happy to be in Germany. And let's watch some German TV. And wouldn't you know it, even in the 90s, harder to find the German original series. I could watch the A-Team in dubbed. I could watch X-Files dubbed. I could watch MTV Top 100 dubbed.
Sorry,
and
just because it's the current relates to the current thing. Maybe Martin, you know who said it. Maybe even Baerbock, the German foreign minister, or someone, or Scholz. I think someone literally just said, America finally has to understand that Germany is not, and I'm going to say it wrong now, 51st state of the US or something like that. Wasn't there just a real statement made by a politician recently about that?
Yeah.
So
yeah, but
what's funny is I don't think Americans even think that Germany, like, they don't. Americans are they just want you to be American. They don't even understand why. They just don't care. It's just because we have and this is the isolation content, the idea that you're more and more isolated. And America's like Russia was in the 70s, and we're definitely on purpose. Most Americans never leave. Most Americans don't leave their own small town, let alone leave their state, let alone leave their country. So Germans in the rest of the world who've been trying to be like the Hollywood version of Americans are starting to recognize Americans are not like they are on TV. Thank God, because the ones on TV are worse, actually. But Germans, I mean, you come on. How many 16-year-old girls have you met from Stuttgart who watched MTV and they became something as weird as the Japanese version of America? I mean, there's a whole MTV programming that's going on to the kids, and maybe isolationism is kind of the answer, because if you don't let them watch this propaganda, right? This is worse than North Korean propaganda by a 10 factor. And it lasts longer. I mean, this was like 4 hours of your friggin' day going to 100 American pop songs.
Just to be completely clear, and that's just part of it, aside from all the series and so on, even in Austria, they're having a discussion about the public broadcasting and what is it worth, because it's like, it's sponsored by taxes, basically. And everyone is like, well, all you show is reruns of Malcolm in the Middle, you know, like that's
Germany wasn't like this in 1997. I'm just letting you know. If you don't remember, it was slightly different. There was pink, there was glam, there was a lot of cool things going on. It wasn't Harry Styles MTV. I'm just saying.
So I would just like
that's, by the way, is the destruction of the hermetic law of gender.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And no, it's not the hermetic completion of gender, which would be, you know, there's an idea of like David Bowie. You know, David Bowie was maybe hermetic completion, the androgyny period. This is not where we're headed towards. We're headed away from that. And I want to emphasize the point that by destroying gender rather than fulfilling gender, we're neutralizing gender, not becoming sexual god androgyny. Like the thing that your goal is, you're not getting it that way. You're getting the opposite. You're actually neutering yourself. But one is neutering themselves by doing this, and it's pretty clear.
Yeah.
You get the neutralized Legos. And just one thing to be very clear, and also I wasn't so aware of this because all you hear, I'll just mention it because this is the public part of it. You know, in Second World War, the code of the Germans was this Enigma code officially was resolved in Bletchley Park. And from what I came to understand now, this was not the only thing they did there. So just to be very clear, obviously, if you win a war, you're gonna choose what culture the besieged nation or the nation that lost the war is gonna have. So this
Right.
has been set up from at least 1950 or whatever, when this was phased in, and then everything just got imported, you know. And Germany and also Austria, I would say, is completely flooded with American cultural imperialism, you know.
Yeah.
So
I really again recommend Rollerball because it's shot in Munich in the 60s. And so it's kind of the point that they're using conquered Munich as an example of what the rest of the world will look like after the corporate colonization, that every city in the world will be conquered, and you'll have these sort of globalist sports teams, and you'll lose your local identity in the process. And this is something that's kind of funny today because you can go to any culture and people think they're special right now, right? David Plate was talking about this. You could go to Afghanistan and they're like, "Oh, we are liking to have a cultural. We like to eat. It's very important to our culture that we eat. You know, it's like, well, yeah, we all like to eat. No, but we like to have gatherings where we eat together. You know, yeah. Anybody ever thinks they're special because of the human qualities that we have, and they're going to take all of that away from us more and more, so that we're the same, but the same in the sense that we're incomplete. Because you're going to need a culture. So where's that culture come from? And then it comes, of course, from the corporation. Corporatism. It's coming. I don't know. The Enigma code is really terrifying because when the Odessa machine figured out how to read it, and they started doing these, Turing acceptable losses, they're like, oh, how many British kids have to die so that the Germans don't know that we know the code? And the Germans are thinking, well, there's no way that the British know what we're saying because they're letting hundreds of thousands of their own boys die. You know, what kind of monsters would do that? What kind of inhuman? There's no way that the British are that inhuman. And of course, they were.
And they still are when you look at Ukraine.
Yeah. It's crazy, actually, looking at Ukraine right now. There's a drone strike I just was looking at. Let me see. The Russian drone down near Ukraine. So Russia's starting to say, hey, we're noticing more and more that outside of Ukraine, you're starting to gather your military equipment. So things are starting to spread very quickly this week outside of Ukraine. And, we've seen what they want to do to the Germans. They want the Germans to be drafted, essentially, to fight for this war, which is kind of nuts. I mean, it is nuts, but how far are they going to go? I mean, it seems like they're saying that the Germans, if they really are the politically correct, tolerant people they are, then they should go kill Ukrainians. What is happening?
Yes, because of the implanted, inferiority and guilt complex, you're now supposed to do, now fight another war. I mean, how insane is that? Logically, of course, it's completely out of the window.
Fight another war. B, invade Ukraine. I mean, remember last time? And C, I mean, it's the Germans being posed optics. The Russians' optics right now are Germans invade Ukraine. That's their whole PR campaign against the Nazis. There's no way the West is not dicking with them. The West could send Romanians. The West could send Canadians. Germans? Why Germans? Because they're German. This is a kind of racial.
And I think you know about this. We brought this up before. There is some unreleased Churchill speech or something where he's referring to the Germans as the Huns, right? And like
right. I don't think that's unreleased. I think he actually did refer to them as the Huns. Yeah, like openly. And that's interesting because of a whole other thing, though, because historically, the connection to the Germans and the Austrians with the Ottomans. I mean, the British actually do look at Germans as, darker, right? Because they're those Southern Germans, right? And that is racism. The idea that the Southern Germans are somehow inferior to the Northern Scandinavians of England. I mean, it's kind of Hitlerian what the Churchill British thought, that the Southern Germans, oh, well, they're dirtier because they're Turkic. I mean, that's exactly what Churchill pushed, that rhetoric. Pretty crazy. Yeah, what do you think is going to happen next? In terms of Ukraine and the world stage.
Well, I'll leave that to Martin.
Interesting. So, I mean, Bakhmut is about to fall, right? That will definitely be. I actually look at Bakhmut like a little Verdun, because you really have this city that's encircled by three sides, and you have one road still going out, and the Ukrainians pushing everything in there. But you actually probably saw some videos also that all the tanks and trucks and everything that's leaving, that the Russians just take it out. I mean, that's really it's a meat grinder, and it's very comparable to World War I, what happened in Verdun. So
that's the craziest thing, that World War I was so poorly planned, or rather because you couldn't do much against it. You have people dying in these I want to say a trench, but yeah, it's like a meat grinder. It's a very small space that they're being forced into, and there's no reason for it. There's all these better things you could do. Why are they fighting? It's literally seems like a human sacrifice that they're doing that particular, and the destruction of technology, so that they can say, oh, well, it costs a lot of money to run a war. We're going to need more loans for war. I mean, it's not a very efficient use of war, right? If they didn't have the money, they wouldn't be fighting that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But there is who is that American general who says it's basically lost? Scott Ritter says it's lost. So there is absolutely no way they can win this war. I mean, it's absolutely.
Well, they've already. I mean, it's intellectual. They've gotten to a point where they've made so many people upset, and America's trying to, in the West, are trying to push this unipolarity that it just upsets enough people that they're trying desperately to come up with another solution. So when that many people are saying, I'll do anything other than that to come up with another solution, very quickly it destroys the petrodollar, and we're at that point now.
Yeah. So India just started to pay in rubles for the oil they get from Russia.
Yeah, I mean, guys, everyone's talking about Bitcoin. You should be investing in rubles, but I know Bitcoin's up too, so that's nice. But that's also interesting that as the Western economy starts to collapse, that Bitcoin starts to rise again a little bit. Is that just what do you think? Is there any is Bitcoin? I used to be a really love Bitcoin kind of person, and now I'm more and more skeptical. I'm more and more convinced that the majority share of Bitcoin has been purchased and controlled by the UBS financial block.
Yeah, I have the same opinion, basically. Unfortunately, I was with the 2017 ICO craze, where all the companies sprung up and many closed down pretty quickly, and I was just waiting, when will it break out and so on. But then they had this, Bitcoin in America. There was even the statement by the SEC afterwards, and they said, we deliberately made these Bitcoin futures to crash the price and so on. So it's obvious the deep state is heavily involved, and the exchanges are heavily controlled. It still is, I think, a superior mechanism in many ways, or the idea of cryptocurrencies, open source and easy to adapt and prototype. But obviously the market is also very, very controlled, unfortunately. So
I don't know what the future for crypto, but we got to do something soon. You put this up. Winston Churchill use of the Huns does not need a warning, says campaigners. National Archives have been criticized for warning readers about Winston Churchill's use of the word Huns to describe Germans. Research by the government official archive published highlighted the word used by the Second World War leader. It deemed the term Huns derogatory and said it obviously needed to be seen in historical context. Yeah, I mean, it does. The idea that British people were super racist, and I don't know, did that changed at some point? I don't know if it did, but that they're saying, okay, these German. I mean, there's a little palpable irony to this. Oh, those racist Germans, they're dirty and brown. Like, that is a very strange way to go with it, Winston Churchill. But that is what he did. That's what he did all the time. Actually, he said a lot of things a lot of the time because he used to just stare at a mirror while he was drunk for half of his day and into his evening because he couldn't sleep at night, and he would just yell at himself, and he would just look at himself, give himself angry eye, and then he would just come up with one line quips at himself, like, oh yeah, you kiss your mother with that mouth. He would just do that all day to himself, and because of that, he was able to always have a retort. If someone ever said anything to him, he'd have something back to them. There was a woman who said, frankly, Mr. Churchill, I'm not sure which I have more displeasure for, your politic or your mustache. And so Churchill says, well, lucky for you and myself, madam, you're unlikely to find yourself in contact with either, right? And so he's constantly known for these little cute whips, except for the Hun line, I guess.
Wasn't he also the one who said that democracy is really bad, but it's the best system we have? Isn't that quote coming from him as well? Well, I'm like, yeah, makes sense. And the other thing, just as you showed it up now, pulled it up now for a second, this is just another sideline, but I just find it so interesting, you know, just like with companies and so on. When did all these football clubs emerge? And it really here also seems like, you know, new reset, new culture, you give them bread and games, and that's when everyone, you know, gets to make their soccer club. I really don't know, but I always just wondered, because you always see the logos and it always says when it was established, you know, and it's also all around this 1850, 1890 time period.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. You got this kind of post, or I don't know if it's tuberculosis, but there's a period that, you know, there's a kind of a loss of cultural society, and then these Ivy League kind of schools. I don't know what the equivalent is in Austria and Germany, but we call them Ivy because of the ivy that grows on the buildings. Which, come on,
really? That's the reason.
Yeah,
because the thing is, in my high school, they cut it down when I was there for the second or third year, but it was completely overgrown inside. The complete inside was overgrown with like leaves, and they even filmed a scene for Harry Potter in that building, because it's obviously like an old school Tatarian building that looks like Hogwarts. But I didn't know that Ivy League, that's the reason for it, even. That of course is highly suspicious.
Yeah. I mean, come on, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because their schools had ivy on the buildings, which meant that they were better schools because they were these older buildings, you know. And
yeah, so I went to an Ivy League high school.
Yeah,
let's say.
Write that book, man. I mean, it's pretty weird though. The more you look at the football clubs, because they were their community centers, and so if you were, I mean, this is also why British people have accents. Everybody has a different accent, right? But British schools teach accents. It's not the same as in America. You know, you might have the British move in to a Dutch-speaking town, and so the British learn how to speak English with a Dutch accent, and that's where you get some of the weirdest New York accents. Are British people trying to speak English still, just trying to hang on to the Dutch accents? And
right, because it was New Amsterdam first officially.
Yeah,
right?
So people like. Yeah, you ever been to the chili capital of the world? Like that's a British accent on a Dutch accent speaking English as an American. That's 4 levels of proxy. With British schools, you took a bunch of people, like you look at Scottish people who, by the way, kind of forced everyone to speak English. They don't speak English. They don't speak English well, but they also, it's not their native language. In English is a created language. So in the 16th century, the 19th century, all of these schools start creating accents. So you could say, oh, well, that person, they're from Oxford. Clearly, they have the Oxford accent. That person, they're from Cambridge. Oh, they're clearly from Cambridge because they have the Cambridge accent. And the accent tells you, oh, that person's this wealthy because they have this wealthy of an accent. That is a completely fabricated British concept that probably existed in Iran and in different parts of the world. China, for instance, Manchuria had their own accent, their own language.
But really, this is just great mind control. Again, I bring it back to Dune, where in Dune, the Bene Gesserit have the voice. And if they speak in the voice, everyone has to listen. And it's similar here, because if you could present any topic, if it's presented by someone who has one of these particular accents, it immediately gives you this subconscious impulse, like, oh, this must be relevant and authoritative, even though it's just a, deep state training program individual.
But again, you also had the idea that you could inherit a military position. So my father was a general, a 4-star general. So that means I will inherit his 4-star generality. It doesn't mean that I'm good at being a general. It might be that it means I'm trained to be a general. It might be because I'm, maybe I had to go to that school and wear a cape just like my dad did or something. But in general, you're not a general because you're good at it. There's no merit to the system. And so you go to these schools, you play with these people. They end up being your teammates, but the teammates become actually when you go to colonize Africa either soldiers you're with if you're poor, or other alliances, partnerships, other generals that are running other battalions, right?
Yeah, and then always the ugly thing about war, just one sentence, is that most people, from what I understood, they often then said either they were just following their duty, they don't really know what's going on, and most oftentimes they just want to protect their friends with whom they're on the battlefield, and that's where they're fighting. So how, again, a very positive, empathetic quality of humans is completely misused and abused to play sacrifice magic games. Yeah.
Right. Also, just someone brought up French, and I was going to mention that the Southern accent has a lot to do with British people speaking English in a place that used to speak French. And you can hear it in the drawl, actually, in a lot of the accents, you know, that there's actually, that's because it was Arcadian. And so from Louisiana into Minnesota, right? Like when you look at the Louisiana Purchase, Louisiana is this tiny little state, right? This is this little tiny spot here. But you type in Louisiana Purchase, of course, you see that half of the United States, much more than the colonies, right? This huge amount of area. In fact, Louisiana is the smallest part of Louisiana Purchase. So the amount of people that were speaking French, even in Spanish Florida, in Mississippi, in places along the East Coast, there were even more. But the mafia did not start in New York. The mafia in the United States came from Sicily to the New Orleans Bay. And so the Arcadian French connection to the Italians, also the Romance cultures that could kind of communicate Spanish, Italian, and French were able to closer communicate. That actually built a lot of the accents in the South as well. And there's a huge racial derogatory feeling towards Southerners in the United States since the Civil War. But up to that point, the Southerners were considered to be the hyper intellectuals. And even after that point, because so many of these people were intellectuals, when they weren't able to go to school and there wasn't any infrastructure after the Civil War, they moved to France. And so the 1940s, 30s, 40s, some of the old Confederates were in charge of the 1930s, 40s French Revolutionary period, where the Nazis were fighting against the Confederates, who were involved in French politics in Paris, and were the inspiration for the 1960s French liberation movement of the schools. So it's weird kind of that there's a Confederate tie to the 1960s New Wave French films and French liberation period. But you can see it if you just follow the history, right? And how everyone was kicked out. But it's so crazy how big Louisiana was, right?
Oh, yeah. And I just noticed kind of some analogy to Tataria, because so here they're trying to, and that would be interesting to see what happens over the next decades if they're trying to phase out the Louisiana Purchase and have only Louisiana be left over. Because with the Tartarians, there is a story by Jules Verne of 1873. And he actually tells the story of that the Russian Tsar is sending a courier to a city, Irkutsk in Siberia. And the Tartars are not this huge, big power. The Tartars are only one tribe that is fighting against the Russians. So they scaled it down and made it disappear.
There's a really good book on that, actually, as well, on the Trans-Siberian timeline. And when Saint Peter, where is it? Tsar Peter? I forget. I think it's Tsar Peter is building. He's having built this telegram line across Russia, across Alaska, into Canada, and across the way they keep running into these native Inuit people who are the descendants of a lost ancient civilization. And it's a constantly mentioned and thought about thing like, what was it like here before? Because clearly things have changed so much. And these are the survivors. And they compare it to the Neanderthal, because they say the Neanderthal are thought of as being these brutes who had no culture, but likely they did. And it was just lost after a natural disaster. And somehow they continued to survive anyway, just by getting rid of their, Apple TVs or whatever.
Okay.
Probably not Apple TVs, but maybe they had, because the fact that they moved to spears, and you see that they do have art. The Neanderthals build these amazing Indian arrowheads, and they have these ways of shaving the sharpest points of stones and everything. They have amazing technology, but it's all focused on survival because they're living in extended winters and they have to be able to survive without spring for a long period. But I also wanted to pull up the BLM map. So when you look at the United States, and you start to notice these Indian reservations, which are run by BLM, Bureau of Land Management, that so much of the United States is divided up And if you remember Europe in the 90s, the idea of driving through it was a lot more difficult because you had not open borders. And you can see the plan for the United States is actually to divide up the United States, make it difficult to get from one part to another by making it impossible to drive through Native American reservations without having some sort of passport. And up to this point, you could drive across America the way you can drive across Europe right now. But there are already places where it's starting to become difficult. And 200 miles of the coast of California just became a Native Indian reservation. 51% of Oklahoma is now an Indian reservation. 51%. So it's going to be kind of interesting in the coming years as the main thing with BLM is that BLM has a French Napoleonic legal system. If you go to most parts of the United States, you can't just gamble. Like, it's illegal to gamble in a lot of parts of the United States. There are places where it's not. But particularly, you go to where a Native American reservation is, and they have chieftain pact. They can decide to do what they want, and they will have a reservation right by the airport in LA, where it's legal for everyone else, but a Native American reservation can have it. And there might be 1/16th Native American, right? Like, so they're not necessarily distributing the wealth of the casino to the Native Americans at their community.
Not necessarily, yeah.
Right. Use that necessarily. I necessarily added that line so I don't get in trouble. But yeah, the more you look at it, they have a dictatorship where it's an absolute law of the chieftain over the tribe. And this is spreading across the United States. They're saying this is the traditional way, so we should allow it to exist and come back. And I know a lot of Native Americans who aren't super excited about this, actually, the idea of living under a dictatorship of a chieftain. I mean, the examples also in just Western, like, so you go to Louisiana again today, and you never know whether you need to wear a helmet on a motorcycle. The law changes with the governor. If the governor wears a helmet on his motorcycle, then you have to. If the governor doesn't wear it, well, that law is not in effect anymore. And so it's just completely sweeping based on however the dictator feels at the time.
So I don't know how correct that historical review is, but there is a book by Rod Beckstrom called The Starfish and the Spider about organizational theory, which is, I think, pretty interesting book. And he also mentions the official story, I guess, about Native Americans. This is basically about centralized and distributed systems. And as it says, the unstoppable power of leaderless organizations, which we now have with, DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations and all of that. And here in the official story, he explains that the conquistadors had trouble invading because of the distributed authority structure within so-called Native American tribes back then, where they simply reallocated their leader, but it also explicitly states that any leader was only accepted by the individual. And if he wasn't, then that individual sought another leader or just did something different. So there was not this type of dictatorship enforcement power as maybe now they try to make it. So it seems, again, it's a pretty twisted concept as to what they present and what it maybe actually was, or what also makes more sense.
I mean, that's exactly right, though, if you think about it. I don't know, it could be, maybe I'm wrong, but the way that makes sense from my understanding, that if you look at how first you build castles, and after you build first you build a fort, and after you build a fort, then you build your moat. Okay, so America is built this way. A lot of places are built this way. You break it up with moats so that if you get into one area, you don't get into another area. And it's a way of keeping power from spreading quickly. And this is a perfect system. All of these tribes are kind of like local representatives of their area. They're watching over their specific areas. During the weather changes, they're nomadic. So they go to different spaces and they're managing different areas. And it's really difficult if you take one tribe to take the other tribe. That's exactly what we've built today with our Congress systems, our districts, and everything else. But it would also be the first thing you would want to remove if you were trying to take over a place. You try to force these tribes together, try to conquer you conquer the stronger tribe by empowering the weaker two tribes against the stronger tribe, and try to build some sort of chaos in between them. And then eventually you have control because you've destroyed all the infrastructure, and there's just these sweeping areas. This is also very similar to what we were saying earlier, the enclosure movement, because across Europe, there were all these small districts, essentially communities and villages. And eventually, they were all serfs that were living under one person owning the entire 100 square miles of, whatever part of Germany or they were in. All of a sudden, everyone there is working for one person. It's a lot easier to control.
And just because I bring this up, Michelle Gibson makes still lots of super awesome videos, and I really think you should interview her. I think this would be just spectacular. Michelle Gibson on YouTube, yeah, True History, yeah. Because she also recently put out different videos just showing how certain states were suddenly, just like you said, there was a governor and he suddenly owned everything, you know, or also John Levi and others, they show how it really seems like there was just a sell-off. Like we have all this new stuff conquered or everyone's dead or something. And that's why you have certain individuals that built everything and that controlled everything and that were these magnates. First they were orphans and then they basically became kings. I mean, how is that possible? Yeah.
Yeah, we really missed our calling. You know, that could have been somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's all because you didn't stay at NASA, Andreas. You know, I'm sorry.
It's because my dad wouldn't be a Freemason. Dang it, Dad. So I remember Pulp.
Oh, you could have been a Freemason, Andreas.
I know I could have been a contender.
Come
there's a company called Pulp. Have you heard of Pulp? So the president of Paraguay owns Pulp, and his sister, he bought her the newspaper company with the Pulp money, and that's how he became president. I think is the deal. I don't know. They're also very elite and conspiratorial, like to control the country. But by his sister owning the newspaper and someone else he knows, his friend or something, he bought them like the biggest TV station in Paraguay. And then he owns Pulp, which is the biggest soda company in Paraguay. And it's kind of difficult to get Coca-Cola because you can get Pulp instead. He's cornered the economy, and it's amazing, really. You think about it, like he's completely taken over the country this way. And all you need to do is sell sugar water, and he just owns. I mean, everyone has to work for him. People are selling this at their little vendors. People are driving trucks around, moving the product, and the newspapers that say he's the best president. There's no corruption in the country, lower corruption than there's ever been. You know.
Yeah,
it's
then
brilliant.
Just to point out, I mean, Meta this one level with holding companies, Meta this one level with apparently opposing political parties, and you still only have, you know, Unilever, Microsoft, Vanguard, and BlackRock also owning everything. Just here it's more obvious. That seems to be the only real difference. So they only have one brand.
The Pulp girls there, they looked exactly like Hooter girls, right?
Oh yeah, Paraguayan girls are way cuter than you've ever heard. I mean, no, don't go there. It's a secret. Paraguay's cool.
I'll pick you up on the way, okay?
I actually, if you go to Paraguay, take me with you because they speak German there, so I could always use a friend. That's the nice thing about Philadelphia. But yeah, this is, you know, another weird thing about Paraguay, just on a random, since we brought this up, is it's the only country that still speaks its own language mostly. So you have people speaking Spanish, you have people speaking German, but 98% of the population, including the Europeans who've lived there, speak Guarani. Not all the time, you know, but to each other for sure. The natives definitely do. I remember meeting women on the bus in their 60s with Guarani to Spanish books trying to learn Spanish because they never learned Spanish in their entire life living in Paraguay because they didn't need to. And, you know, so that it's really interesting to me that there is a place where the Jesuits allowed for the language to survive. I mean, this was supposed to be the Paraguayan Jesuit Republic. And the fact that they have their own language, it's considered the heart of South America. It's kind of like the Tibet of South America. And it's constantly also the center of the CIA because George Bush owns huge sections of Paraguay. Nivea owns huge sections of Paraguay. They take their water. They use their hydroelectric dam to power most of South America and keep everyone living. This is like fundamentally one of the most gnarly Native American reservations in the world, right? Because they're kept in ultimate poverty in order that the people that use Paraguay for black market smuggling, again, like North Korea, all the scotch that they drink has to fly through Paraguay because they buy Western scotch. So if you want to make money in the embargo economy, you have to do it through Ciudad del Este, the city of the East in Paraguay, which is a major smuggling capital.
Wow.
Definitely amazing country. But yeah, very, very weird because you've got the dynamic between these Euro conquistadors in their suits and the natives. I mean, it's the last place like that I can think of. I met an East German who about a year before he left East Germany, I think we talked about this before. Have you ever seen that movie Heißen Sommer? Heißen Sommer, you know, the East German musical.
So just before we move on, maybe you want to show just the first 5 seconds. You can mute it on the latest video I sent, because this was, Oki Talk. Klaus is actually in Paraguay now, and they have lots of German-speaking people. And this is just a cutting together, just the first few seconds, because this is in Paraguay, but you can see the German text.
Can you share it, because my audio doesn't work on this
Oh,
thing.
you don't need the audio. Just this
okay.
image. That's fine enough.
Sure,
just so you see basically Bavarian type
Yeah,
clothing and so on, and beer fest, so like beer party.
Yep.
And go towards.
I went to a beer fest in Paraguay. It was amazing.
Go towards
and the beer was organic.
And towards almost the end, you even see them dancing in like a traditional German dance with this rhythm everyone knows.
Look at all those police. You always feel super safe in Paraguay. I mean, no, I'm not kidding. These police are chill. They're not bad guys. They're not like American police. Well, not all American police aren't like Paraguayan police. But yeah, these are fun people.
So, and you can just to show that part, to prove it, if you go to minute, let's see, it's pretty much at the end. Oh yeah,
every Paraguayan police I ever met was a nice person, though.
If you go,
I also met David Guetta at a Paraguayan music festival randomly. Like, there's a lot more going on in Paraguay than people realize.
So just skip to 7:20. So they have a good party and beer and even American music. And at 7:20,
no, let's not skip this. I want people to see what it's like in Paraguay. Look at this, guys. Paraguay's freaking amazing. Look how pretty and fun, and everybody is having a great time. It's warm, beautiful. Okay, now I can skip forward. 7 minutes, you say?
7:20, yeah. Here, and because here you really see them doing like this Bavarian, but not Bavarian. I don't know. It's like dance, and the music is so loud, and they have the German flags, And this is in Paraguay, So, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's Bavarian enough. I've seen
I mean, this actually is almost not giving you a good representation, only because you see so many different kinds of people at the same time. Like, you can literally go to places that are just German in Paraguay, like isolated, and that there aren't anyone else but people from Germany, like blonde people from Germany. You can also go to places where the entire culture blends together, which is like, this is saying Chop Fest, and that's awesome because it shows you how much of a fusion culture Paraguay really does have. You have people from Taiwan, from you have former Al Qaeda that live in Ciudad del Este, and I remember getting dim sum and kebabs and listening to techno music with people that were on terrorist lists. Paraguay is a dangerous place in a lot of ways also, but because so many dangerous people are there all together, it kind of neutralizes it, right? Like, nobody wants to do anything if everyone's dangerous. So you've got people walking around with shotguns when you first get to the country, and you're thinking, oh, that's terrifying, there's police everywhere. But that's because it's so safe. Those are the reasons why no one's getting shot, because there's a shotgun. It's a guy with a shotgun at every bank. Paraguay's cool. I like it. But I was going to say, this is a random story. I knew this East German guy, and he'd worked on this East German musical, Heißen Sommer. Heiße Sommer. It's a great it's a communist musical, but it was really good. And when he went away for like a planned vacation for like a weekend, he was like 27. He comes back on Monday, and they say, oh, you are responsible for the death of the greatest East German Democratic Republic of Germany music composer that has ever lived. You're responsible for his death. And he's like, what? What do you mean? What did I do? I'm like, well, while you were gone, he didn't know you weren't going to be here. And he comes in the morning on Saturday, and there's all of these children, the pioneer students that were supposed to sing in a choir. And the pioneer students' paperwork was all lost and jumbled, and he didn't know who was the alto and who was the soprano and where to place the kids. And the lack of structure, and the kids were so loud, and he couldn't organize them, and it gave him a heart attack, and he died. He died right there in front of all the pioneer students in the middle of the filming of the musical sequence. And it's your fault. And he's like, that's horrible. Screw this. I don't want to be East German anymore. So he left East Germany and he went to Paraguay, married an Indian girl, and had a family, and has like a farm in Philadelphia. And he found out like 6 months later that the wall fell. But by that point, he had a baby. So he stayed there. And so I remember seeing him in East Germany, and he would get super drunk and sing the East German anthem with a howler monkey in the middle of the night under a full moon. And that's Paraguay.
Fun times. I want to go to Paraguay and meet Guetta. Sorry, I had to hop in and stream bomb as Raphael was talking about Michelle Gibson, and it just so happens I have a live stream interview with her coming up in 4 hours from now.
Oh my, exciting!
Wow.
Well, there you go. Well, let's definitely everybody make sure you watch that. I mean, I don't know.
Absolutely.
I'm doing Woo, so I might miss it. It's just sad, but I want to see it, so I'll be there in spirit at least.
Right? Yeah, I think it's exactly at the same time, sadly. So if not, I will send you the link, and if you can make maybe the end or the beginning of it, by all means.
Yeah, just try to like prolong the magic. Say like be driving when it's supposed to start for like another couple half hours. You know, do the thing. Do the thing. You know?
Not on the first one back.
All right.
Like, yo, we just got Michelle back. Not gonna make her wait for a few hours on the first one.
I don't blame you. Well, we
are
are
an episode, by the way. You're talking about the banks a whole bunch. Did another one collapse today, or was
Swiss Bank is supposed to collapse? Swiss
Good.
Bank hasn't collapsed yet. But it's about to.
supposed
I was trying to make the
for,
joke
like,
"Cry
a month.
Suisse." I wanted to say "Cry Suisse." I thought that would be kind of funny, like "Crisis Swiss Bank." It didn't really work for me.
Well,
But-
you can still use it when it actually does finally collapse in like a couple of months or weeks or days.
That would be
or
a collapse.
hours.
Technically, right now was the crisis. Crisis is on the verge of total collapse. So we would have.
True.
I don't know.
Same
Do you
with
guys
Deutsche Bank,
think
right?
though that this whole idea that banks collapsing are how many people do you know have any money in banks anymore anyway? And I think it's going to be really hard for people to be sympathetic to anybody in the next few years because most people are like, "Oh, well, you lost your house. My father lost his house in 2008." Wussy, you know, like people are going to be so used to the idea of having nothing that it's going to be hard to sympathize.
Yeah, right.
Well,
but
the
I
only
mean,
angle I had heard was that supposedly it was an attack on crypto. Like there was some kind of a thing they were backing in that bank, and that this was the real angle.
Oh, Silicon
Generally,
Valley.
I would just say it seems very much like any of these failures is completely constructed, just like in 2008. So it's not a coincidence. But yeah.
Well,
I don't know
you're
if so.
insured up to like $250,000 for your bank
SVB.
account. So if you have more than $250,000 in any one bank account, I mean, that's kind of weird to do, I think, right?
Yeah,
I would think.
insured banks. But so what caused the crypto crisis in the Silicon Valley Bank was that Circle, the company that owns and issues USDC stablecoin, had 25% of their actual US dollars stored in SVB. And at 3 billion or something, 3 or 5 billion or something that was in there of their actual US dollars, like you said, only 250,000 is insured. So you have, 99% of that still, or 95% of that uninsured. And that's what caused the crisis until it was bailed out. But yeah, there was what you're saying, Raphael, of this attack, that it seemed that they were trying to crash this bank because so many of the crypto projects have their money in Silicon Valley Bank, and that it has put a major dent on it. And with everything else that has happened within the crypto market over this last year and the broader economic markets, that the contagion most likely is still yet to spread.
I mean, anyhow, I would say these financial things should be more distributed anyhow. It's not good everyone having it in the same bank. And just as an aside, joke or not, the book I brought up earlier, Starfish and Spider, about distributed system, the guy, Rod Backstrom, later went on to become the director of ICANN, which is basically decentralized name register for the internet. And I was like, how does that work? I don't know.
ICANN is such a scam. Oh my God. As someone who owns websites, I don't own any website. You know what I mean? All my websites, I've had domain names since I was 9 to 10 years old. And the biggest conspiracy besides nailing carpets to the floor and water bottles that I can think of is probably ICANN. The fact that they can control, and you can look into the one that really got me thinking about it was Tuvalu. So there's an island that sank called Tuvalu, and they own the .tv domain. So that if you pay $20 a year for the .tv, you could have CNN.tv, and that money would go to Tuvalu, which is supposed to help them sink their island, so this elite family that's living in Paris that owns the ambassador family for Tuvalu. And yeah, ICANN is just a series of scams like this where you don't own anything, but you have the permission to have an address at ICANN. I mean,
It's like a license plate for a car.
We really shouldn't need that. We should honestly, it should have been as simple as you create one that's outside of ICANN that's completely, you can create your own address space for. But then people would need some sort of a two-way app or something that goes into Chrome to replace addresses. And ICANN addresses are just that much simpler than a phone number. But you can think of Twitter space. That is a kind of an alternative to an ICANN, because you just have your OkiTalk or Matrix. The way the Matrix works, you can create your own address space. So you can do things with QR codes eventually that will replace ICANN. But for now, ICANN is just, I mean, God, what a brilliant racket. They have they must own islands near Hawaii, you know? It's just so brilliant.
They definitely do. Look at Scam Bankrupt Fraud, and he bought out half the Bahamas with his fraud.
Right. Yeah, but there are some interesting people that aren't evil. So I was thinking about what's the guy who started eBay?
He's Elon Musk?
No.
No, that was PayPal.
Founder of eBay. My last rant. I apologize. Pierre Omidyar. Pierre Omidyar is one of the coolest people in the world. It's so cool. Honestly, nice guy. But he's very introverted, doesn't want to deal with anybody. If you remember how eBay was originally, he was like, let him figure it out. Let's say there's a scammer on there. We'll figure it out. Like, he was just so open-minded and so trusting and optimistic. And there's a reason why he got pushed out of eBay. But if you ever want to talk to him, you can. You just have to build a Second Life rig, because he will only interview you from his palatial mansion in Hawaii through Second Life. If you want to get into the Second Life virtual world, then you can see him on the island server that he made. And yeah, you can hang out with him.
That's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. I know I called him cool, but he is a long-term Democratic Party donor. So take that with a grain of salt.
Oh dear. What's actually going on in that metaverse island?
All right. Well, I wanted to also make sure, actually, you know what? Before I disappear, I wanted to share your links. Make sure you go to Crypto Alchemist, because Bernie is beautiful. And he's going to do a stream tonight. And we're all going to watch it, whether we watch at the same time or right after.
Mr. Xirtus, see that one right there, Walter Bosley. It's also on your channel, and if you're available for it,
definitely tomorrow with Bosley,
23rd. Thursday.
Who could miss another wonderful opportunity to hang out with Walter? Were you there? Do you remember the early days of the Tartary bro Walter Bosley incidents?
I think I missed that.
Oh my God. Years ago, Walter Bosley said, I don't know about this Tataria thing. Sounds kind of silly. And so a bunch of people who watched my channel got into his video and were spamming him really hard and sending him all the links to our videos. And now Walter's a good friend, and he's been on the show a few times. And we've done some exchange work, because he's talked about NIMSA and the German anti-gravity UFO group. Right? The connection there to Tartaria. Hyper palpable. Yeah, I love Walter. He's said before he thinks that there are some YouTube videos out there about Tartaria that are still nonsense, but that a lot of the stuff he's starting to see is real, and it connects to what he's studied, Napoleon and everything else. So that is very exciting. Guys, make sure that we're all there together for Walter Bosley. And Alien Scientist is gonna be fun. Also,
it's gonna be epic.
Raphael's channel, Act Like You Know 26, which is live right now, showing this video. So you make sure you subscribe, because you're missing out on this. But also, he did Team Rabbit Hole yesterday, which I tuned in at the end of. I was really excited to see Alexandra on Jupiter Returns.
No, you have to go on live. That's the.
Oh, that's not the one.
They added the new tabs, here.
Right. Yeah.
Your comment was great. What did you say? What was your comment again? Can you repeat that?
I don't even remember.
You said orgy is just a Latin word for community gathering or something like that.
Orgy is just a Latin word for community gathering. That's true. I mean, I remember one time I saw this movie from the 60s about, I don't even look up the word orgy right now, but I remember I was watching this 1967 Italian movie about these two 16-year-old boys in ancient Rome that go to an orgy. And it was not what I thought it was. It was basically the same as Project X. People used to just go to parties. But yeah, that just shows you how hyper-sexed our Christian right has become. So make sure you go to Act Like You Know 26, and there's a playlist he made, which will get you to Martin Hipp. You can see all of Martin Hipp's videos. There's going to be some more, because I actually am going to start scraping on the internet, because I know there's a few more videos out there of you. But if you go to the link here, this is the t.me/Tataria777. And
by the way, that's the correct spelling of Tataria, because it was actually the French king who referred to Tataria with a second R and wanted to move it towards Tartarus, you know,
Right.
so the underworld.
So that people thought it was evil and death,
And
associated with death, right?
I found a German dictionary from 1908 that actually says that Tataria is written that way. So that's why I'm
Right.
writing it that way.
Scroll down to the last.
I think it checks out if you just type in taters. You can even see like Genghis Khan taters. Like you can see,
Yeah.
like we knew better. We all know better. But sorry, go ahead. What were you saying, Raph?
Don't just scroll down to the last. This one here. Take a good look.
Yep.
And here it says.
Put you all in there.
Wow, there you go. That's awesome. Nice. Look at me. I'm right there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Raph, you deserve to be above me, but you know, we'll just allow this
Please.
last but not least.
No,
pretty
perfect.
I'm
Everyone's there.
flattered.
Thank you,
I-
Andreas.
I think this is awesome. But yeah, make sure you guys go to the Tataria 777 Telegram group because I think it's one of the most useful places. If you're trying to get a fresh perspective on all of this research, it's really useful. And there's a translation feature. If you click the logo right here, you can actually read this stuff in English. You can do this on your app or you can do this in the browser. So it doesn't matter that we're speaking different languages because we're thinking about the same things and you're going to be able to understand. So it's pretty great to join the community. Let's break down the Babel Tower and get back together. Exciting stuff.
Sounds great.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys for being here and I'll see you all later. Take care.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care, guys.
Much love and respect, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye bye.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarian.